Welcome back to Never Enough Novels for a look at the best new books coming out in April of 2025. I have a huge list of books for you today from a wide variety of genres. There's a few thrillers, a few fantasies, and a whole slew of romance books. This is one of my favorite times of year because publishers are starting to release all of their romances to get ready for summer reading. So there are some hits from some of the biggest romance authors out there right now that I'm going to share today. As a reminder, make sure you like this video and hit subscribe to see even more of my book recommendations. And also, you can join my channel now for just 99 cents and you'll get cute little bookish badges and emotes that are exclusive to my members. I'm going to kick off my list with the romances because those are the ones that I'm most excited about and I cannot wait to share with you. The first one I think is going to be a little bit under the radar though, and it's a book that I'm currently reading. It's called The Mysterious Bakery on Rue de Paris, and it's by Evie Woods. A huge thanks to One More Chapter for sending this book my way. I specifically requested it because I'm always a huge fan of books set in France, and this one is also set at a bakery, so it is just right up my alley. But I'm about halfway through so far, and it is just like the most charming quintessential French romance that exists. So I'm absolutely loving it, and I wanted to make sure I shared it with you today because I don't think it's going to pop up on many lists because it's a little bit outweighed by, Abby Jimenez and Emily Henry. But this one's definitely worth your time if you're at all interested in books set in France or just want like a really lighthearted, quick romance about a girl who travels to France to take a job at a bakery, finds love, finds some found family, and a place for herself in this new world. It also has a tiny bit of a mystery as she's trying to figure out who the head baker is at this bakery because she never sees this person. And also, I think a slight hint of magic. So if you like a little bit of magical realism as well, this has a little bit of everything and it's just a really fun book for spring that I think a lot of people will love. Then I'll get into the two biggest blockbusters of April, and the first one is Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez. It honestly wouldn't be spring or summer without a new Abby Jimenez book, and I'm always so excited to see what she comes up with next. This may be one of our favorite book boyfriends yet from Abby because our male main character is Xavier, and he is a veterinarian who we initially meet while he's cuddling a kitten. Like, how adorable is that meet cute? And when he meets our female main character, Samantha, however, they get off on the wrong foot. So he doesn't want things to be like messed up between them. So he asks her out on a date and she reluctantly agrees. And this turns into like the most perfect first date ever for both of them. Their chemistry is absolutely insane and they both recognize this as something truly meaningful and possibly long lasting. But Samantha is dealing with a family crisis and she knows that she is in no position to seriously date someone. So she basically instructs Xavier to just completely forget about her and they each kind of have to go their separate ways while she's dealing with this crisis. But the overall theme of the book is, can anyone truly forget something magical like this that happened? And I'm really excited to see kind of how these two find their way back to each other in circumstances that aren't ideal. Right on the heels of Abby is another incredibly popular romance author, and that is Emily Henry. And her new book for the summer is called Great Big Beautiful Life. This book is about two writers who are competing for the job of a lifetime to write the memoir of a famous heiress who's aging and ready to tell her story named Margaret Ives. This heiress and member of one of the most scandalous families for decades invites Hayden and Alice to come stay with her for a 1-month trial period to try to decide which one of them is a better fit to tell her story. Alice may have less experience than Pulitzer Prize winning Hayden, but she knows that her optimism and her people skills are definitely going to win over Margaret and help her get this job. The problem is that Margaret seems to be telling different parts of her story to each Alice and Hayden and not giving them the whole story to start with. However, their ironclad NDA that they signed and this like weird tension between them keeps them from turning to each other to try and figure out what exactly is going on. I adore any books set in the literary world, and this one just seems to be a little bit different than her previous books. So I'm interested to see kind of how the tension develops between Hayden and Alice, and ultimately more about the story of Margaret and what she's done with her life. Plus, if you're interested, Target has an exclusive edition that has bonus chapters, so I will put the link to that edition and all of these books down below in the description so you can grab them from Amazon or Target and help support this channel along the way. The next romance I wanted to share is called Swept Away by Beth O'Leary. This author is a little bit more hit or miss for me. So, when she originally wrote her debut novel called The Flat Share, I fell in love with it, and it was an incredibly popular book, and I think it got turned into like a TV series as well. But her novels since then just haven't kind of quite lived up to that first one. So, I'm always a little bit skeptical going into any new release, but I've heard good reviews about this one so far, so I'm hoping she's back on her game with Swept Away. After Zeke and Lexi spend one magical night together, they think it's going to be just a one-time thing and they won't really ever see each other again. Zeke is not planning to stick around long because he is just planning to buy back his father's boat, and Lexi has her own responsibilities because she agreed to take care of her best friend's daughter. Unfortunately, when they wake up the morning after this one night that they spent together, they realized that a miscommunication resulted in neither of them actually anchoring the boat to the dock, and the boat has now been swept out to sea and they are surrounded by just miles and miles of ocean. Since they had no preparations for this little trip, they are now stuck out at sea with very little supplies and provisions and must figure out how to get back to land. I love that this has that obvious forced proximity trope because they are literally stuck on a tiny boat together with absolutely nothing else to do. So as they spend a few days basically trying to work out how to get back to safety, they also start to open up to each other and learn more about each other, and isn't that just the perfect place to fall in love? Since I've heard some other good reviews from this, I'm definitely going to add this one higher up on my list, and it sounds like it'll be a pretty unique romance and kind of perfect for that spring-summer time frame. The last romance on my list for April is called Wild and Wrangled by Lila Sage, and this is the last book in her Rebel Blue Ranch series. It definitely has a bit of a bittersweet taste for me because I have adored every book in this series so far, and I'm going to be really sad to say goodbye to these characters, but all of them have been 5-star reads. I'm not normally a cowboy romance person, but there is something about these books that I have absolutely fallen in love with, and I cannot wait to get into book 4. In this book, we get to discover the love story between two side characters that we've met already but haven't heard a lot about. One of them is the little girl that we've seen before, Riley's mom, and Dusty, who has been pining after Cam for almost his entire life. Cam is currently on the verge of getting married to someone else for a whole complicated set of reasons that don't actually involve love, when the groom never shows up on the day they're supposed to get married. So her life has been kind of thrown into disarray, and all of these plans she had laid out are now up in the air. So she returns back home and finds out the only house that's available to rent is right next door to Dusty. Dusty, on the other hand, never kind of found the right moment to pursue anything more serious with Cam, but now she is back and she is officially unattached. He is determined to show her that he is serious about her and can be everything that she needs, whether it's just as friends or something more. Cam wants to stay as far away from him as possible, but he is slowly winning her over, and she finds out it might just be the easiest thing in the world to fall in love with him. I have been rooting for these two to get together for ages as kind of the side characters in the other books, so I am really excited to get to hear their entire story. Since this is the last book in the series, I'm going to be sad to say goodbye to these characters, but it also makes me excited to see what Lila Sage will come up with next. But I highly recommend this entire series. Even if you don't normally read cowboy romance, these are just excellent contemporary romance books that I think you will love. Let's switch tactics then and get to a few thrillers that are coming out in April. The first one is by Abby Waxman, who normally writes more like general fiction or women's fiction books, but this is her first foray into more of like a mystery thriller. So I'm interested to see how it goes, and I feel like her ability as just a storyteller is going to make this book a hit. And this one is called One Death at a Time. This book basically features an unlikely duo who team up to solve a mystery. So our first character is a miserable actress who is under investigation for murder, and she teams up with a perky millennial to try and clear her name. Mason is thrilled to have the opportunity to not only help keep Julia sober, but also help her figure out what's going on with this murder. And her overall enthusiasm is something that Julia just detests. So you've got a little bit of a grumpy sunshine situation here, and a definite case of unlikely friends as these two travel from Hollywood Hills to Palm Springs to try and figure out where this dead body came from and who killed this person. Along the way, we get to read along as they find some common interests and form an unexpected bond, but they still have to stay one step ahead of the danger because there is still a murderer out there and they need to figure out who it is before they can kill again. The other thriller that I was interested in is called The Last Session by Julia Bartz, and this is sort of a locked room thriller where they're at a location that's pretty remote and no one has any chance to get away. I love these type of situations in thrillers, and this one is even a little bit more unique because the location is actually a wellness center. So our story starts out when a catatonic woman shows up in this psychiatric unit, and social worker Thea is trying to figure out what happened to her. She swears she's seen her before or knows her from somewhere, and she's shocked to find out this woman has a link to Thea's own traumatic past. But when this patient eventually comes back around and regains consciousness, she can't remember anything about what happened to her. Thea isn't exactly sure what to do with her, but the decision is ultimately taken out of her hands when the patient just goes missing and Thea cannot find her anywhere. Even though she is no longer under her care, Thea kind of makes it her mission to track her down and ultimately ends up at this remote wellness center in New Mexico. The retreat is led by this couple who claim they can uncover deep-seated romantic and sexual issues while you're staying at this center and help you get to the bottom of these problems. But Thea quickly realizes that something is definitely off about this whole situation. However, as she kind of goes through the program, she is starting to get more answers about her past. And she ultimately has to make the decision of, is she going to stay to try and get those answers that she's been seeking her whole life, or run while she still has the chance? And the last two books I want to share are more in the fantasy magical realism genre. So the first one is The Sirens. This one definitely falls more as a historical fiction, magical realism type novel versus a strictly fantasy one. But it was actually just selected as one of the celebrity book clubs for April, so I think it's going to get a lot of buzz this month. And like I said, I had requested it from the publisher, so thank you to St. Martin's for sending this my way, because the story of sirens in general has always intrigued me, so I'm really curious to see how they'll tie that into this story. The story takes place over 3 different timelines. So in 2019, Lucy wakes up with her hands around her ex-lover's throat, and she has no idea of how she got to this point, just some nightmare that she thought she was in that turns out to be kind of real life. And she flees to her sister's town, but she realizes that Jess is not at her home, and she isn't sure where she went. So Lucy decides to stick around for a while to basically try and track down Jess. And while she's there in this small town, she starts to hear rumblings about strange things that have happened, like men going missing at sea or hearing voices in caverns. And she decides to start reading Jess's diaries from when she was a child to try and understand more about the situation and where Jess might have gone. And then the second timeline is 20 years earlier, and we meet Jess as a teenager. Jess has had an allergy to water her entire life, and this unique situation has kind of set her apart from other kids her age. So she's always felt sort of lonely and pushed off to the side. But when an art teacher takes an interest in her drawings and in her, she starts to realize that there might be hope for a different life out there for her. And then our final timeline is centuries earlier, in 1800, when we meet 2 twins who were basically ripped apart from their father and sent on this convict boat to Australia. They have always been terrified of the ocean because of a traumatic event in their past, so they are absolutely terrified of this journey. But while they're on the water, they discover some of their bodies are changing and they're feeling this alluring call to the sea. So between these 3 storylines, they're woven together throughout the book, and we kind of find out how their stories are connected. So I'm planning to start this one soon because I think it sounds just really intriguing. From what I've heard so far, it's kind of more of a slow burn and not a fast-paced, high-energy book, but I think the story sounds intriguing enough that I'm going to really like it anyway. So especially because it was picked as a celebrity book club. I know a lot of people are going to be talking about this one. I think this will be a fun book to read for April. And the last book is called Enchantra by Kaylee Smith, and this is a much more typical fantasy book. So I read the first book in the series, Phantasma, somewhat recently, but it seems like this one can also be read almost as a standalone. In Enchantra, Genevieve takes center stage, and she has her own experience with a different set of paranormal games. The story begins with Genevieve, who is left with her own series of unanswered questions after their mother's sudden death, but she is given the chance to possibly get some answers when she is invited to Enchantra, which is a cursed palace in Italy that contains a deadly labyrinth. Only one occupant of the house can survive to win the game, but she has the hope of winning and learning more about these questions that she has. She is initially denied entrance to the palace by Rowan, who is one of 7 siblings that have been cursed to participate in these games year after year. But she sneaks inside and finds herself with only one way to get out, which is win the entire thing. Once Rowan realizes that she made it inside, he determines that the only way that she has any hope of living is to team up with him. So they form an unlikely alliance, but they are still playing a very deadly game, and the most important rule is that you can never trust your heart. I thought Phantasma was such a fun and unique competition type fantasy book, and I'm not normally a huge fan of paranormal books at all, but I really loved that one, so I'm excited to see kind of what Genevieve's story is like and how this labyrinth sets itself up to be this like deadly competition as well. So as you can see, there are a ton of new books this month that are going to be worth a read. So I hope you found some new ones to you that you can add to your TBR. Stay tuned for more book recommendations next month.